Every opportunity that I give those stewards, he says, every single time they give me a penalty. That line went around the paddock within an hour of the Hungarian Grand Prix. But 3 days later, in a much quieter room, a different man said something that mattered more. Fred Vasseur was asked why Lewis Hamilton got a three-place grid penalty for blocking Oscar Piastri in qualifying, and instead of defending the sanction or blaming the stewards, he did something team principals almost never do on camera. He said the team told Hamilton far too late. Not vague regret, not paddock diplomacy, a direct admission that the mistake belonged to Ferrari before it ever belonged to the rulebook. That single sentence changes what this story actually is. It stops being a story about a Formula One driver failing to check his mirrors. It becomes a story about who inside one of the most resourced organizations on the grid failed to say 4 words in time. Here's what actually happened at the Hungaroring on Saturday. Hamilton is on a flying lap in the final part of qualifying, sitting at a speed that will hold up as one of the best sessions he's driven in Ferrari red. Behind him, Oscar Piastri is also on a push lap, closing fast. Hamilton is traveling at what the stewards later call a significantly reduced speed on the racing line, exactly where Piastri needs the road. The stewards review the telemetry, the radio, the in-car footage. Their finding is blunt. Ferrari unnecessarily impeded the McLaren. The sanction is 3 grid places, and it moves Hamilton from a front row start to 5th. Ferrari does not fight it, and when Vasseur speaks to the cameras afterward, he doesn't dispute the stewards' math either. He says his team told Hamilton that Piastri was coming but far too late, and that Hamilton's own account of the incident matches what the team already knew internally. That's the part worth sitting with. Fred Vasseur is not a rival engineer briefing the press to score a point off Ferrari. This is not paddock gossip filtering through an anonymous source. This is the team principal himself in front of a microphone, confirming that his own operation is the reason a 7-time champion lost a front row start. Subscribe right now if you want the version of this story that doesn't get cleaned up before it reaches the highlight reel, and tell me in the comments which country you're watching from, because how seriously you take a "we were late" admission depends a lot on how used you are to teams admitting anything at all. So let's actually take the sentence apart. Was Hamilton alongside another car? Forced into a defensive line he couldn't control? No, he was alone on a push lap of his own. Did he have a legitimate reason to be traveling that slowly through that part of the circuit? Not according to the stewards, and not according to Ferrari's own read of the situation either. Did he know Piastri was behind him at the moment that actually mattered? By his own words and by Vasseur's confirmation, the information reached him only once the McLaren was already at the apex. 3 questions, 3 answers, and every single one of them points at a radio call that arrived after the moment it needed to. Do the actual math on what that delay cost. A 3-place grid penalty in Hungary is not the same 3 places anywhere else on the calendar. This is the tightest, most overtaking resistance circuit on the schedule, the one place all season where track position is worth more than raw pace. Hamilton starts 5th instead of 2nd. He spends the entire afternoon in traffic that a front row start would never have produced, gets caught behind a virtual safety car sequence that never should have mattered to him, and picks up a second penalty, a 5-second sanction for a pit lane speed reading of 80.1 against a limit of 80, a number so small it barely counts as speeding. He finishes 5th. 2 Ferrari mistakes in one weekend, and the second one only becomes relevant because the first one put him in the wrong position on track to begin with. Keep that sequence in mind because it comes back later in a very different color. This isn't the first time this exact kind of failure has shown up in a Ferrari cockpit this season, and it isn't only happened to Hamilton. 3 weeks earlier at Spa, George Russell's Mercedes collided with Hamilton on the opening lap, an incident the stewards ruled Hamilton was wholly responsible for. Russell himself, the driver on the receiving end, called it a racing incident afterward, not a deliberate move, not recklessness, just 2 cars finding the same piece of track at the same moment. And yet the sanction landed the same way a communication failure lands, a fixed penalty applied to a driver who, in the other man's own words, didn't do anything particularly wrong. 2 different failures, 2 different causes, 1 shared outcome. A driver paying a price that the person closest to the incident doesn't think matches what actually happened. Is that a pattern, or is it 2 unrelated moments that happen to rhyme because it's the same driver both times? That's a fair question, and I'm not going to pretend the answer is obvious. What is not in question, because Vasseur said it himself, is that at least one of those 4 penalties in 3 race weekends had nothing to do with driving standards and everything to do with a message that didn't reach the cockpit on time. If you're not subscribed yet, this is exactly the kind of story where the follow-up matters more than the headline. Because the question this raises about Ferrari's radio discipline doesn't go away over the summer break. Put yourself on that pit wall for a second. You know Piastri is closing. You know Hamilton is mid-lap, committed, unable to simply pull off the racing line without risking his own lap time on a session that matters. Do you interrupt him immediately and risk ruining his own push lap over a car that might not even catch him in time? Or do you wait, hope the gap holds, and risk exactly what happened? There was no clean option available in that moment. Ferrari's failure wasn't in the decision, it was in how late the decision got made at all. Vasseur's honesty here deserves real credit, and it's worth saying plainly. A lot of team principals faced with the same footage would have found a way to blame the driver, or blame the regulations, or simply say nothing and let the penalty stand without comment. Vasseur didn't do that. He took the hit publicly, on the record, with his own driver's championship hopes, sitting 50 points behind the leader. That's not nothing. It's also not the end of the conversation, because here's what that admission actually opens up. Once you stop looking at the radio call in isolation and start looking at who inside Ferrari answers for it, a team principal saying, "We told him too late," is not the same as a team principal saying who specifically failed to send the message on time, why the process allowed that gap to exist, or what changes because of it. Vasseur owned the outcome. He did not name the failure point. And in an organization with a driver still mathematically alive in a world championship fight, the difference between owning an outcome and fixing the process that produced it is not a small one. 9 races remain after the summer break. 50 points is a real gap, but it is not an impossible one. And Hamilton has closed bigger deficits than that in a single half season before. What he cannot afford heading into Zandvoort and then Monza, where Ferrari are reportedly bringing an upgraded engine specifically built to close the straight line gap to Mercedes, is a repeat of exactly this kind of delay at exactly the wrong moment. A 0.5 of a second engine upgrade means very little if the message that matters most still arrives 1 beat too late. Here's the verdict. Fred Vasseur telling the truth about Ferrari's mistake is the right instinct, and it's rarer in this sport than it should be. But an admission is not a fix. It tells you who was honest after the fact. It does not tell you whether the same gap in communication is sitting there, waiting for the next split-second moment that decides a podium or decides a championship. That's not proven yet. It's simply the question Ferrari now has to answer before Monza, not after it. Zandvoort is next, and it's being treated internally as a data-gathering weekend for Ferrari's new engine specification. Whether that same specification arrives with the communication discipline to match it is the part nobody at Maranello has said out loud yet. So tell me, does Ferrari fix this before Monza? Or does the same kind of gap show up again the next time it actually matters? Predict it in the comments, and if you think Vasseur's honesty should count for more than it's getting credit for right now, hit like and say so. Subscribe, because when the second half of the season starts putting that engine and that radio discipline to the test at the same time, you'll want to already be here. Until the next one.